Hi everyone. Today's video is a very special video because today is the birthday of Ida B. Wells-Barnett. Ida B. Wells-Barnett was a Black woman born in 1862, I believe, and her entire life was dedicated to campaigning against the lynching of Black women, men, and children. So in today's video, I'm going to be showing you some books about lynching. I'm also going to be discussing with you about Ida B. Wells's life and how it is still relevant to this day. So before I get started on all of that, I wanted to show you my newest painting that I made in honor of Ida B. Wells-Barnett. So this is the painting. It is of Ida B. Wells, and I made sure that she was all fashionable and sequined. I think I'm going to hang it on my wall somewhere in my apartment. So, to get started, let me show you a little bit of books that I have in my collection that you could possibly add to your collection that are about Ida B. Wells and also about lynching. So let us start with the books about Ida B. Wells-Barnett. This book is a children's chapter book. It is called The Princess of the Press, The Story of Ida B. Wells-Barnett, and it was written by Angela Shelf Medearis. So this is Angela Shelf Medearis. She's also written other books as well, but this one in particular is about Ida B. Wells. I have not read it yet, but I'm going to be reading it very soon. The next book is also a children's book. It is called Ida B. Wells, Let the Truth Be Told, and it is illustrated by Bonnie Christensen and is written by Walter Dean Myers, who was also a children's book author. He wrote a lot of books, especially for young Black boys. And the last book is one that I am currently reading. I am not finished with it yet, and it is called Southern Horrors and Other Writing, the Anti-Lynching Campaign of Ida B. Wells, 1892 to 1900, and it is edited with an introduction by Jacqueline Jones Royster. This is the book that I am going to be reviewing in this video. It contains 3 of Ida B. Wells's pamphlets about lynching. Her pamphlets were Southern Horrors, A Red Record, and Mob Rule in New Orleans. So this book contains all of those books, and I will be discussing the one that I finished reading recently, which is Southern Horrors. The next book is At the Hands of Persons Unknown, The Lynching of Black America. It is by Philip Dray, and it goes into detail about lynching in the past and present. I have only skimmed through this book. I have not read it in its entirety, but it also has certain photographs in there as well to give you some idea of the monstrosity of lynching. The next book is Death of Innocence, the story of the hate crime that changed America, and it is written by Mamie-Till Mobley, who was the mother of Emmett Till. It tells the life of Emmett Till and how she started her own personal campaign against lynching after her son Emmett Till was lynched in 1955. It's one of the more famous lynchings that people know about. It's one of the few lynchings that people who are still alive today were alive when it actually happened. And the last book is 100 Years of Lynchings by Ralph Ginzburg. I have honestly not read this book in its entirety because it's just so overwhelming. I usually have nightmares after I read it. I've also bought it 3 times because every time I get to the middle of the book, it mysteriously vanishes. I don't know why. But yes, that is what I wanted to show you. So if you're interested in getting any of those books, you can find them online. I'll be sure to put a list of the titles in the description box. So we are going to get started talking about Ida B. Wells-Barnett and also reviewing this book simultaneously. So let me tell you about the author of this book before I get started. So it says the author, Jacqueline Jones Royster, is an associate professor of English at Ohio State University. Among her areas of interest are the rhetorical history of women of African descent and the development of literacy. She has published articles in books and journals on literacy studies and women's studies. She is currently at work on Traces of a Stream, Literacy and Social Change Among African American Women. This book was published in the 90s. I believe it was published in 1997 by Bedford Books, and I have so far really enjoyed it, especially the part where the author was writing. She broke down lynch law and gave an overview of the history of the world that Ida B. Wells entered into when she was born, and I thought that was very, very great. I love books that give information and also explain the information and show how these happenings are influencing our modern day world. So let us start off with Ida B. Wells-Barnett's bio, and then we'll go into what the author talks about lynching. So she starts off saying, if I can find it from the top of my head, Ida B. Wells. I learned about Ida B. Wells when I was a teenager. She wasn't someone that I read about in my history books. If you don't know what she looks like, this is an etching or a lino cutter. What's that etching? Or a print of her. Very beautiful woman with natural hair that she styled into I guess you call it a bouffant. So Ida B. Wells was born in Holly Springs, Mississippi, July 16, 1862, and she was the eldest daughter of James Wells, a carpenter, and Elizabeth Warrenton Wells, a cook. After the Civil War, Wells' parents were politically active in Holly Springs. Her father became locally known as a race man, a term assigned to African American men and women who were intimately involved in the leadership of African American communities. So race man, the first time I heard that term was about when I was reading about Garveyites, who were followers of Marcus Garvey. And Marcus Garvey was he was from Jamaica, and he gathered so many women and men of African descent around the world in order to go back to Africa and start their own communities and societies, since they were facing oppression, particularly in the United States. So one Garveyite that comes to mind is Malcolm X's father, who was lynched, I believe, by the Ku Klux Klan. They laid him on the railroad tracks, and the train basically sliced him over and so. But being a race man or race woman was a very dangerous position to be in. You had to be very, very bold in order to risk your life for your beliefs during that time. And I feel that Ida B. Wells' upbringing is what made her so vocal against lynching as she got older and gained more notoriety around the world. Let us see. It says, James Wells was a local businessman, a Mason, and a member of the Board of Trustees of Shaw University, supported by the Freedmen's Bureau, which the author explains in this book, which later became Rusk College. Both of Wells's parents provided Wells with strong role models. They worked hard and held places of respect in the community as forward-looking people. They educated their children in Freedmen's Bureau schools and were committed to helping to forge a brighter world around them. I thought that was very interesting because her parents had been enslaved, and usually when a person is enslaved, if you're doing genealogy, sometimes you have a hard time finding the person's actual name, their actual last name, what they were like. And I like that this book explained about her parents, because other books that I've read about her either don't know much about her parents or don't talk about her parents' background. All I knew before reading this was that her parents had been enslaved. So let us see. This is what Ida B. Wells says about her parents. She says, "My earliest recollections are of reading the newspaper to my father and an admiring group of his friends. He was interested in politics, and I heard the words of Ku Klux Klan long before I knew what they meant. I knew dimly that it meant something fearful by the anxious way my mother walked the floor at night when my father was out to a political meeting. Our job was to go to school and learn all we could. My mother went along to school with us until she learned to read the Bible. After that, she visited the school regularly to see how we were getting. She was not 40 when she died, but she had borne 8 children and brought us up with a strict discipline that many mothers who have had educational advantages have not exceeded." I thought that was kind of fascinating because I noticed just from reading as a child about Black history and Black people getting into schools after enslavement, a lot of the adults, the first books they wanted to read was the Bible because that was the one book they were familiar with, and I just wanted to read the stories and learn how. And you would have classes of people all ages. It wasn't like today where you had like, okay, this is the kindergarten class, this is the second grade class. No, you had everybody. You had elderly people in there, you had toddlers in there, you had like teenagers in there, and they would all help each other learning how to read. And a lot of those who excelled became teachers, particularly Black women. So Ida B. Wells, she also became a teacher at a very young age. So unfortunately, what happened during Ida B. Wells's early life was that her parents died. She was only 16 years old when her parents and her youngest brother died suddenly in a yellow fever epidemic. So because of this, she was made the caretaker of all of her siblings. I know she had people helping her, but she was the primary caretaker of her remaining siblings. And she had 5 of them. She had had another brother that had died some years earlier of spinal meningitis. Her childhood ended abruptly and a life of independence and service to others began. She left school, made herself look older, passed the teaching examination in her county, and obtained a teaching position 6 miles outside of town. During the week, Wells fulfilled her teaching position while an old friend of her mother's took care of the children. On the weekends, Wells came home to become the head of the family and take on the full burden of household chores before returning to her country school on Sunday evenings. Good grief. Look, me as 16 years old, I couldn't have done any of that. Me at 16 years old, I swear my brain was like a 10-year-old. I literally don't know how she did it and how she handled all of these things. That is a lot for a 16-year-old child. Not only do you have a full-time job, you're also taking care of all of your siblings, as well as dealing with the stress of your parents dying at an early age. So that is a lot of psychological trauma that Ida B. Wells handled with grace and fortitude. Also, one of her siblings was physically handicapped. I don't know what it was that was medically wrong with her. I don't know if she had, if it was something mental, like she had a mental illness, or if she was actually physically handicapped, like she couldn't walk, or she had some type of ailment where she couldn't physically take care of herself. But one of her siblings had medical issues. So that is another type of pressure on her as well. After a year of this grueling schedule, Wells's aunt, her mother's sister, invited her to move to Memphis, Tennessee to better her circumstances. So she arranged for her 2 brothers to be apprenticed with local tradesmen and for a physically handicapped sister to be taken care of by relatives in Holly Springs. She took her youngest sisters with her to Memphis. Wells also carried with her habits and preferences that would constitute a foundation for her new life. So because she had had all of these events taking place in her life, I can see now why she wasn't swayed by all of these death threats and all of these issues that probably came up later in her life, because she had already handled it as a child. I think that's why she was such a good organizer. and could rile up all of these people and gather them up to collaborate with her. That's why she didn't sway from her anti-lynching campaign, because she only had one goal in mind. Her goal was thinking forward direction. That is why she could be vocal with what she spoke about and why she could say it in a certain way. Because how can you say something stupid to a person who's not only simultaneously raised a family but was also prematurely made an orphan? You can't, because they're basically like a mighty mountain. Okay, so she continues, she goes to Memphis, she secures a teaching position, and during this time, she joins a church, which is the AME, the African Methodist Episcopal Church, which is a very large membership in that particular denomination. She came into contact with AME bishops Henry McNeil Turner, who were learned men, excellent orators, and politically active. So during this, because she moved, she was exposed to all of these different big name people that we read about now in Black history. She was with Frederick Douglass, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper was a writer. She also, Frances Ellen Watkins Harper wrote, what did she write? Bury Me in a Free Land, that was a poem. The Slave Auction, I think Bury Me in a Free Land was, make me a grave where'er you will, in a lowly plain or a lofty hill. Make it among earth's humblest graves, but not in a land where men are slaves. And it continues on talking about enslavement. I wonder if Frances Ellen Watkins Harper also had a profound influence on Ida B. Wells-Barnett, because racists that were speaking against Frances Ellen Watkins Harper thought she was a man due to the fiery tone of her writing. So I wonder if she also influenced Ida B. Wells's tone of writing, because I know later on that when Ida B. Wells was writing, they thought that she was a man writing as well. So same thing. So she joined a lyceum composed primarily of public school teachers whose members enjoyed music, read together, gave recitations, wrote and presented essays, and debated issues of the day. Associated with the lyceum was a periodical, the Evening Star. By 1886, Wells had been asked to assume its editorship. So this is where she begins her writing career, her career as a journalist. She was asked to write a regular column in the form of letters to readers for the Living Way, a religious weekly paper. She signed the letters, I don't know if it's Iola or Eola. It's I-O-L-A. So I'll call it Iola or Eola. And wrote about conditions and problems that were of critical concern to her people. So she uses this pen name, and the magazine or the editorial, her editorial gains popularity. Then during this time, she became a community activist. So, she's following the steps. Like, first you get the connections, then you do something in your field, then you get into the community activism. So she started as a community activist, first in 1884 on a trip to Memphis. What happened was she was forcibly removed from a train. She was asked to move from her seat in the ladies' coach and relocate to the smoking car. So this is her being relocated to the smoking car. After that, she sued the railroad company, and she won. Unfortunately, they overturned her win. They overturned, and I don't know if she got anything. The Wells case became a minor pawn within a display of resurgent power. So she wrote about this. She wrote about her ordeal. She also became the co-owner of a newspaper called the Free Speech and Headlight, with Reverend F. Nightingale and J. L. Fleming. By 1891, she and Fleming had bought out Nightingale's interest in the paper and shortened its names to Free Speech. Now, the Free Speech paper was very vocal and it made a lot of waves with its black readers. In fact, it made so many waves that I think her office was ransacked because of something that she had written. She also secured an income competitive with her teaching salary, which was important since her editorials against the school board led her to being fired from the teaching post. You can only speak so far. Like, people are always watching what you're saying. There's certain things, even today, you can't post certain things, which I think is kind of, I think you should have a life outside of your job, but, you know, you can say some things and have some certain viewpoints that will get you fired from your job. And that is exactly what happened with Ida B. Wells-Barnett. But thankfully, she was transitioned into a place where she could have her voice be heard, where she could be her true and authentic self. Okay. This context, okay. Ooh, I went back way too far. So because of this, earlier in the book, the author mentions about the role of women in society and how Ida B. Wells' tone of voice in her, I don't even know what's going on outside. Anyway, how Ida B. Wells is speaking out against lynching and all sorts of things almost went against the grain of what people considered womanhood of that time. Women, as you know, did not have a lot of rights. They couldn't buy certain things. They couldn't go certain places without a man's permission. They couldn't vote. Oh, it was like being servitude to a patriarchal society, right? And there were certain standards that they had for women. There were certain things that were not seen as feminine. So her speaking out and using the words that she used and all sorts of things, they painted her or portrayed her as masculine. In fact, today they're still doing that with black women. They'll portray black women as masculine or as not dainty or as not feminine. Or when they think of femininity, most people don't think of black women when it comes the first thought to their mind, unless you are a person that actually knows black women and knows the issues that black women have to deal with from the past and today, and actively exert your femininity to society who says that we are not feminine, which is not true. That is completely a lie. But yes, this is in the introduction. It says, at the same time that lines of power and authority were being drawn around issues of race, gender restrictions were being seriously questioned. I believe that even during this time, there were two women's movements. There was the white women's movement and there was the black women's movement. I have come across some stories where there were issues of black women and white suffragists, not getting along, or the white women would just stay silent to what was happening to black women and their men as well. So I want to read more about black women in the feminist or suffragist movement, but I have not read that much about them so far. So I cannot give my personal opinion as of yet because I don't have enough information. The struggle of women for higher education also expanded women's spheres. Oberlin College was the first institution of higher education to open its doors to women and to people of color. The first women were admitted in 1837. Educational opportunities generally remained scarce. True womanhood was defined within the sphere of domestic or private rather than public interests. Women were supposed to be moral, stabilizing, civilizing influence in the home. They were responsible for the heart and spirit. Good women were supposed to be pure, pious, modest, above the weaknesses of the physical body that is uninterested in sexual pleasure, and focus on the care of children, husband, and household. Now, I think this is interesting because Ida B. Wells used this public societal thought and turned it on its head when she was writing about lynching. a lot of I guess a lot of racist people believed that black women were just over sexual and that they were just whores in the street, and black men were just these monsters who wanted to go out and rape white women and all sorts of things. But Ida B. Wells used statistics to show that black women were not the aggressors. They were also being raped as well. But when a black woman got raped, nobody did anything about it. No man was lynched for raping a black woman. No white man was lynched for raping a black woman. And she mentions, or black woman or child, and she mentions this in her book Southern Horrors, which was, I should have put little, sorry. Hello. Something happened with my camera and I got interrupted. But as I was saying before, let me go into the book Southern Horrors, which was Ida B. Wells-Barnett's first pamphlet. So as I was mentioned earlier, Ida B. Wells became a social justice activist, and because of her community activism and because of being around all of these different people from different walks of life whose main concern or focus was the upliftment of people of African descent, she joined different clubs and organizations. So after she published about her experience with the train, like being abused and stuff on the train, it says, after her story was published in the New York Age, two African-American women, Victoria Earls Matthews of New York and Maricha Lyons of Brooklyn, decided to host a testimonial dinner for Wells. A fellow journalist for the New York Age and several other papers around the country, is best known as the founding director of the White Rose Mission, a shelter for African-American women and girls who had recently migrated from South. It also functioned as a community center for women and children, teaching self-improvement and Christian living. So these two women decided to host a tribute to Ida B. Wells and her honorable work. And their goal was to raise funds to help her continue her work. On October 5th, 1892, at Lyric Hall in New York, they brought together 250 African-American women from New York, Philadelphia, and Boston, including some of the most recognized and notable women of the day. So they got women from all of these different states, and they hosted a dinner for her, and they gave her, I believe, $500. And with this $500, hold on, I don't know where I read this. With this $500, she used the money in order to publish her first book, Southern Horrors. At the beginning, before I get into it, so this is one of the women. She's an African-American woman, and this is one of the women. This is Maricha Lyons, and this is Victoria Earl Matthews. This is also T. Thomas Fortune, who was also a colleague of hers, and of course, Frederick Douglass. All of the big wigs. This is the cover of Southern Horrors, Lynch Law in all its phases. It was 15 cents, and it made headlines around the world. It brought international shock to people. Her preface is very bold. She says, okay. The greater part of what is contained in these pages was published in the New York Age, June 25, 1892, an explanation of the editorial which the Memphis whites considered sufficiently infamous to justify the destruction of my paper, The Free Speech. This statement is not a shield for a despoiler of virtue, nor altogether a defense for the poor blind Afro-American Samsons who suffer themselves to be betrayed by white Delilahs. It is a contribution to the truth, an array of facts, and the perusal of which it is hoped will stimulate this great American public to demand that justice be done through the heavens fall. It is with no pleasure I have dipped my hands in the corruption here exposed. Somebody must show that the Afro-American race is more sinned against than sinning, and it seems to have fallen upon me to do so. The awful death roll that Judge Lynch is calling every week is appalling, not only because of the lives it takes, the rank cruelty and outrage to the victims, but because of the prejudice it fosters and the stain it places against the good name of a weak race. Now, what she's talking about, of course, is lynching. The primary cause, they say, or they claimed for lynching, was black men were lusting after white women and they would rape the women, and that is why they would be lynched. And of course, Ida B. Wells even says earlier in one of her statements that she too believed that sometimes the cause of the lynching was rape, or what she had been told. But it wasn't until her 3 black male friends were lynched that her views changed. She knew these men personally. They were successful business owners. They had a grocery store. And the reason they were lynched was because they were successful in business. In Ralph Ginzburg's book, 100 Years of Lynching, 100 Years of Lynchings, you will see this over and over and over. They'll accuse a black man of rape. Then they'll lynch him. Sometimes the reason that they lynched him, or the reason that they lynched a black woman or child, is because they said good morning. There's a person lynched for saying good morning. There's a person lynched because they couldn't find the other person, the actual person who did it. There was a person lynched for being in a relationship with a white woman, and they said it was rape. Some of the victims, or the accused, the supposed women that were raped, some of them were in actual relationships with these black men. Others were saying that this was not the person, that it was somebody else, and they would just lynch the person anyway, because they believed that if the woman saw the rapist, that she would just be so traumatized. So a lot of these people weren't identified. There was a lynching of a pregnant black woman, Mary Turner, and they cut her open. Like, they cut open her baby, her womb, and stomped on her baby. She's 8 months pregnant. Was that lynching for rape? I don't think so. You didn't even lynch the actual rapist. Some lynchings were actually white men who had darkened their skin to be black. That's why when Ida B. Wells came out with this book and was name-dropping people, they burned. She was name-dropping people, okay? I mean, any regular person would be mad if your name was dropped in some scandal. Yeah, you would want to kill somebody. Now think if you're a white man being accused and your name is being dropped in a world where your name holds a lot of weight, because, I mean, reputation is still a big deal today, but in those days it was a very, very, very big deal, okay? You had certain niceties that you had to go through in society. You had certain virtues and personas that you wanted to portray of yourself. Having your name slandered is going to affect everything in your life. Especially if you're trying to push the lie that your daughter is just this virtuous woman that's like, oh, she is just so pristine and untouched, and why would anybody dishonor her virtue? And here she is having a whole relationship under your nose. So you'll formulate a lie. And these are just one of the many examples that Ida B. Wells talked about in Southern Horrors. She begins with a statement from Frederick Douglass at the beginning of the book, a foreword, which is very good because he was a reputable man. A lot of people admired him. So placing his words at the front of your book was turning your book from, your book was already golden, now it's platinum, okay? So, chapter 1, she talks about the offense. Wednesday evening, May 24th, 1892, the city of Memphis was filled with excitement. Editorials in the daily papers of that date caused a meeting to be held in the Cotton Exchange building. A committee was sent for the editors of the Free Speech, which is her paper, an Afro-American journal published in that city, and the only reason the open threats of lynching that were made were not carried out was because they could not be found, because they had left town. The cause of all of this commotion was the following editorial published in the Free Speech, May 21st, 1892. And it says, she quotes one of her articles and talks about 8 black men who had been lynched, being accused of raping a white woman. The last 3 for killing a white man and 5 on the same old racket, the new alarm about raping white women. The same program of hanging, then shooting bullets into the lifeless body was carried out to the letters. Nobody in this section of the country believes the old threadbare lie that Negro men rape white women. If Southern white men are not careful, they will overreach themselves, and public sentiment will have a reaction. A conclusion will then be reached, which will be very damaging to the moral reputation of their women. Now, that's one thing that she crossed so many lines and stepped on so many toes just writing that. First, you talking about you better watch yourself. You saying this to these white supremacists. You better watch yourself before I say something about your women. And you know they don't want anything said about their women. In fact, there was a man in this book. I don't know if he was lynched or if he was just beaten very badly. But they left a note on him. They left a note that said, "We must protect our Southern women." Rape was not rape. Rape could be you accidentally touched her. You said good morning. You blew a kiss to her. You were caught kissing her. Or you just looked her way. Or she could have just screamed. Like there were cases where it's like, oh, these black men are there. I'm scared. And then you just get lynched just for being there. There was a man almost lynched for hanging curtains in a woman's room. He was I think he sold curtains, and she had brought him to install the curtains in her house. And they walked in the room, saw him installing the curtains, and then tried to accuse him of rape. How can you do that if she's not even there? It's some psychopaths. So of course they got really, really upset. Not only did she do that, she started name dropping people. She said where they had met. This was after, I don't know if this was after they killed her friends or during. Okay. The fact that okay. So after she does this, she decides to turn their own words against them and bring in a racist article that they wrote, because you can tell at that time period which papers were mostly written by black people and which papers were written by racist people, because you just look at the wording and you'll know. So this one I feel was written by a racist person. It says, those Negroes who are attempting to make the lynching of individuals of their race a means for arousing the worst passions of their kind are playing with a dangerous sentiment. The fact that a black scoundrel is allowed to live and utter such loathsome and repulsive calumnies is a volume of evidence as to the wonderful patience of Southern whites. But we have had enough of it. So you can see how angry this person is writing. They're writing as a collective. Lynchings never just happen with one person. If it was just one person lynching you, if it was just one supremacist lynching you, you would not be lynched because they would be beaten. It's just not going to be a fair fight. That is why they had to have so many people coming to lynch one person. What a racist does, racists usually never act alone. They have to have a posse with them. I've only seen read about maybe 1 or 2 cases where a racist worked alone. But usually the racist person will work as a collective. They will have a mob. They will have prominent people in their society helping to kill you. not only during this time, or not during that time, but also with this time. You might see this happening with different forms of police brutality, or a person goes to a certain part of the United States and they go to a small country town and they're never seen again. I've heard those stories happen before too. In fact, that happened recently with a 16, I think she was 16 years old. She went to some small town. They say that she committed suicide, but it didn't make any sense. They wouldn't give any information about the body, and there are just some people involved. So you had to be on your very best awareness when you were living in this society. It was not safe for Black people to just be by themselves. That's why you had Black people living in communities, because there is safety in numbers. There's also terror in numbers as well. That's why it's not just Ku Klux. It is Ku Klux Klan. It is a clan of people. So Ida B. Wells talks about that after this editorial. She said, "Since my business has been destroyed and I am in exile from home because of that editorial, the issue has been forced, and as a writer of it, I feel that my race and the public generally should have a statement of the facts as they exist. The whites of Montgomery knew J.C. Duke sounded the keynote of the situation, which they would gladly hide from the world when he said in his paper, The Herald, 5 years ago, 'Why is it that white women attract Negro men more than in former days? There was a time when such a thing was unheard of. There is a secret to this thing, and we greatly suspect that it is the growing appreciation of white Juliets for colored Romeos.'" I'm just like, well, I'm sure it was always there. It's not like, I mean, nowadays you still can get killed for being in an interracial relationship. They just don't, I think they don't document that many cases as much as they do. But I have heard of some modern day cases of Black men being lynched for being in interracial relationships, as well as Black women being murdered for being in interracial relationships, or just being the only Black woman there. Like that woman that went to that slumber party a couple of years ago and they found her dead in the lawn. But anyway, Ida B. Wells made a lot of people mad because not only did she say that this was an outright lie, that rape was not the cause of most of these lynchings, but she also gives examples of relationships that were exposed, interracial relationships that resulted in a lynching. And she also name dropped some people in there. So let us find one person that she name dropped. Ooh, I cannot find them. In Natchez, Mississippi, Mrs. Marshall, one of the creme de la creme of the city, created a tremendous sensation several years ago. She has a Black coachman who was married and had been in her employ several years. During this time, she gave birth to a child whose color was remarked, but traced to some brunette ancestor, and one of the fashionable dames of the city was its godmother. This is kind of juicy. Mrs. Marshall's social position was unquestioned, and wealth showered every dainty on this child, which was idolized with its brothers and sisters by its white papa. In course of time, another child appeared on the scene, but it was unmistakably dark. All were alarmed, and the rush of blood, strangulation, were the conjectures, but the doctor, when asked the cause, grimly told them it was a Negro child. There was a family conclave. The coachman heard of it, and leaving his own family, went west and never returned. Yeah. As soon as Mrs. Marshall was able to travel, she was sent away in deep disgrace. Her husband died within the year of a broken heart. Then she mentions about different white women that gave birth to biracial children. Last winter, but she says, there's hardly a town in the South which has not had an instance of the kind, which is well known. Hundreds of such cases might be cited, but enough have been given to prove the assertion that there are white women in the South who love the Afro-Americans' company, even as there are white men notorious for their preference for Afro-American women. There is hardly a town in the South which has not an instance of the kind which is well known, and hence the assertion is reiterated that nobody in the South believes the old threadbare lie that Negro men rape white women. Hence, there is a growing demand among Afro-Americans that the guilt or innocence of parties accused of rape be fully established. The utterances of the leading white men show that with them, it is not the crime, but the class. Bishop Fitzgerald has become apologist for lynchers of the rapists of white women only. So what she's stating is, it doesn't matter the white woman's social class. As long as she is a white woman, they would have protected her. It didn't matter if she was a poor white woman. It didn't matter if she's a rich white woman. If they felt that she had been raped by a black man, it was over for you. I think that's what happened with the Tulsa, Oklahoma, was it Tulsa? The Black Wall Street bombing. I think that was over a white woman saying she had been raped. If she had been raped anyway, I mean, that was a successful town. So perhaps they used the white woman as a weapon. In most cases, they did. They would use the white woman as a weapon in order to get what they wanted. They would use the white woman as a weapon to get rid of their competitors. They would use it just for fun, use her just for fun to destroy entire communities just for the fun of it. Like, it didn't make any sense. Now, there were cases of interracial relationships that I do remember reading about as a child in 100 Years of Lynchings. And I honestly couldn't understand why the men were putting their lives at risk like that. I only came to maybe a few conclusions. Like, one was they either really were actually in love with this woman. And when you're in love with somebody, nothing is going to stop you from being with that person. Usually. Nothing, not God, not nothing is going to try to stop you to be with the person that you love. And so perhaps the men were actually in love with these women. Another reason is maybe it was just lust. Maybe it was just this lust from both parties. Sometimes when you're thinking with the mind of lust, you can't think clearly because you're thinking with lust. It clouds your it clouds your perception. It clouds rational thoughts because you're living in the moment. You like the feeling of like, I'm living on the edge. As we mentioned in this little example, the black coachman was married. He was messing with a married woman. They were both messing with each other. But I guess he just wanted to just live on the edge. Some people like living like that. They don't care if there's a risk because in their minds, they're not going to get caught. That is why he left town. He knew what was about to go down. But another thing that I guess another conclusion that I came to is some of these dudes were set up. The only example I can think of where maybe a majority of people can understand is, remember that biblical story of Joseph in the book of Genesis, I think, where Joseph was working for Potiphar and Potiphar's wife was trying to like come up on him. And then she set him up like, she's like, oh, he touched me. What if that was the case? I don't know. Me personally, I wouldn't have done it. But I don't know. I'm not a man. I'm a woman. But if I was a black man in that time who actually valued his life, I don't think no matter how much I loved that woman or lusted after that woman or wanted to live on the edge, I don't think I would be going in that arena because they might not get you, but they'll get your family because it happened as well. If they couldn't find the person they're accusing of rape, they would burn down your whole communities. There was a man whose mother was lynched because they couldn't find him. They accused him of raping a white woman. And since they couldn't find him, they lynched his mother and his entire family. I wouldn't want to put my family in danger like that. Nowadays, people, I guess they think it's safer. I guess. I mean, I personally in my own life have dealt with like face forward racism. So I still don't think it's safe. Honestly. And I feel that if you are in an interracial relationship, that you always have to be aware of the dangers that you could possibly be in. Don't act like this whole society is a post-racist society, because it is not. It is not. We do not know what happens behind closed doors. So if you are in an interracial relationship, I think you should just always be cautious. Don't just brush something under the rug, because your life could potentially be in danger, especially if you are in a more dangerous geographical location. Knowledge can save the lives of both of you. Let us see. So Ida B. Wells says, okay, she says it's only white women only. Governor Tillman of South Carolina, in the month of June, standing under the tree in Barnwell, South Carolina, on which 8 Afro-Americans were hung last year, declared that he would lead a mob to lynch a Negro who raped a white woman. So say the pulpits, officials, and newspapers of the South. But when the victim is a colored woman, it is different. Last winter in Baltimore, Maryland, 3 white ruffians assaulted a Miss Camphor, a young Afro-American girl, while out walking with a young man of her own race. They held her escort and outraged the girl. In Nashville, Tennessee, there is a white man, Pat Hannafin, who outraged a little Afro-American girl, and from the physical injuries received, she has been ruined for life. He was jailed for 6 months, discharged, and is now a detective in that city. In the same city last May, a white man outraged an Afro-American girl in a drugstore. He was arrested and released on bail at the trial. It was rumored that 500 African Americans had organized to lynch him. 250 white citizens armed themselves with Winchesters and guarded him. A cannon was placed in front of his home. The Buchanan Rifles, which were the state militias, ordered to the scene for his protection. The Afro-American mob did not materialize. Only 2 weeks before, F. Grizzard, who had only been charged with rape upon a white woman, had been taken from the jail, with Governor Buchanan and the police and militia standing by. Dragged through the streets in broad daylight, knives plunged into him at every step, and with every fiendish cruelty a frenzied mob could devise. He was at last swung out on the bridge, with hands cut to pieces as he tried to climb up the stanchions, a naked, bloody example of the bloodthirstiness of the 19th century civilization of the Athens of the South. No cannon or military was called out to his defense. He dared to visit a white woman. I'm just like, I know this happened in the past, but like every time I read any of these things, I literally think about now. When I read about that black child that was raped, it just makes me think of this whole, I can't even think of a word to just, I'm wordless right now. But it makes me think how they try to portray black women in the media. It's like, you are this and you are that. You're just full of lust and blah, blah, blah. And when you're 10 years old, you're already full of lust. And when you're 14, you're already sexual. I'm not saying there's something wrong with expressing your sexuality, but that is not all that is to a black woman. Like, we have layers to us. We have different levels to us. Not all of us are exerting sexuality like that. Some of us are exerting sexuality and we're like, okay, I am a sex worker. I am an exotic dancer, or I help you with your libido and give you advice on how to have a healthy sexual relationship with you and yourself and other people. Okay, there are some women. But then there's others that are like, almost like nuns. There's others that aren't very sexual at all. They don't even think about sex. All they do is work on their goals and their career. Like, you can't just classify us all into one thing. Okay. But that's all that's being promoted to us right now. Unless you have other people going in the opposite direction. And I guess I say this, that I think of it in this day because I worked with children, I worked with adolescents, I worked with young Black girls, and I've seen how people, especially adults, try to make them seem older than they are. They try to talk to these children as if they're already adults. They try to talk to these children as if they've already had sexual experiences. They interact with these children as if they want to have a sexual experience with these young Black girls. That's why Ida B. Wells-Barnett wrote with the veracity and rage that she wrote with, because she could see with her own two eyes that this was a lie. How can you be such a narcissist that you don't even see the own error of your ways? Okay, you're angry that somebody apparently raped somebody, yet you have an actual child rapist, and you all come out in droves to protect this child rapist. If I hadn't had this experience in my own life, I wouldn't have believed it myself, because I actually had that happen to me, where a bunch of people came out against me to protect a child rapist. They tried to get me arrested to protect a child molester. They knew he was a child molester, yet they came out to defend this child molester against me, who never did anything to children. Southern horrors. We're in the South. Midwestern horrors. I'm in Missouri, which I guess you could count as a part of the South. But yeah, she goes on and just goes throughout the book giving examples of why this is not about rape, why this is about success of Black people in business, why this is about Black people who just wanted to make something of themselves and they couldn't because these people were getting in their way. She uses the words of racists against them and then counteracts their argument. She also talks about hold on. Whew. I can't. I'm sorry. I'm just like lost in all of her words. No Negro domination. Naturally enough, the commission of these crimes began to tell upon the public conscience, and the Southern white man, as a tribute to the 19th century civilization, was in a manner compelled to give excuses for his barbarism. His excuses have adapted themselves to the emergency and are aptly outlined by the greatest of all Negroes, Frederick Douglass, in an article of recent date, in which he shows that there have been three distinct eras of Southern barbarism, to account for each, for which three distinct excuses have been made. The first excuse given to the civilized world for the murder of unoffending Negroes was the necessity of the white man to repress and stamp out alleged race riots. So that makes sense, because before the whole rape thing was occurring, a rape excuse, there were race riots. They said, it's like, oh my God, they're going to start a riot. There's going to start a riot. And they would come into Black communities and just destroy the whole community. So I understand what she says, like it was race riots, because I do vaguely remember reading about that. Oh, it's a riot. They're trying to take over the plantation. Oh, it's a riot. They're going to like do this. Let's get them before they get us. When there was literally nothing happened. It was just all a lie. From 1865 to 1872, hundreds of colored men and women were mercilessly murdered, and the almost invariable reason assigned was that they met their death by being alleged participants in an insurrection or riot. Then came the second excuse, which had its birth during the turbulent times of Reconstruction. By an amendment to the Constitution, the Negro was given the right of franchise, and theoretically at least, his ballot became his invaluable emblem of citizenship. But this did not last long. The Southern white man would not consider that the Negro had any right which a white man was bound to respect, and the idea of a Republican form of government in the Southern states grew into general contempt. It was maintained that this is a white man's government, and regardless of numbers, the white man should rule. The white man's victory soon became complete by fraud, violence, intimidation, and murder. This is when, they're trying to, when black people were trying to vote. Negro domination. Brutality still continued. Negroes were whipped, scourged, exiled, shot, and hung whenever and wherever it pleased the white man so to treat them, and as the civilized world with increasing persistency held the white people of the South to account for its outlawry, the murderers invented the third excuse: the Negroes had to be killed to avenge their assaults upon women. There could be framed no possible excuse more harmful to the Negro and more unanswerable if true in its sufficiency for the white man. Now that third excuse, I'll give him. That one was a pretty smart excuse. Because rape most cases usually happens on an individual level. Sometimes you'll have gang rapes, but most rapes usually occur on an individual basis. Like, you're taking it with the word of the victim. Like, the word of the victim or witnesses seeing this is what can cause it. Nobody really wants to think about something as horrible as rape. For real, if we want to be honest. Nobody wants to imagine something like that happening to somebody that they love. When a person is raped, they are severely traumatized, but also the people around them that love them are also traumatized as well. And usually the first response is, I'm going to kill whoever did this to you, or I'm going to kill who did this to me. Most people just go out and do the deed, just like Maya Angelou's family did when she got raped as a child. They killed her rapist, and because of that, she did not speak for several years. So that is why this rape excuse was a pretty evil, but it was a smart but very evil excuse, because now you're acting on people's passions. Okay, you want to lynch me because of race riot. Okay, you're saying that so much. We're going to have a riot every week? I don't think so. Okay, you want to lynch me because I have the right to vote. Now you're just looking stupid, because now it's in your laws that I have the right to vote. Well, women couldn't, but men could. Now you have it in your law. I have the right to vote. I am a free citizen. I have the right to vote. You're going to keep lynching me for using my citizenship? Okay. That's going to look stupid after a while. Other countries will be looking at you like, are you crazy? You're barbarians. But if you're using rape, which will draw out an emotional response for people, of course people are going to look the other way. Of course they're going to justify it. Oh, yes, he was a rapist. Oh, yes, he should have. I'm going to put him under the ground, that child killer. Yes. Yeah, that's how it happened. But yeah, as far as this book goes, it was very, very powerful. I wish I could just string my words along with ease and just give you a consistent stream of words to just share with you my ideas of this book, but I can't. You would have to read it yourself, as well as her other books as well. But yeah, that was Ida B. Wells' words from the past to you. I hope that you all learned something from this video, and that you will remember this brave woman who started an anti-lynching campaign. Her anti-lynching campaign became global. She went to Europe and spoke against lynching. Even during her campaign, some of the numbers of lynchings went down as well. She got a lot of Black people to move from the South or leave where they were and relocate to safer areas. She also encouraged Black people to defend themselves. A Winchester rifle should be in every home, which I dutifully believe. Because if you were in that time and you were Black, you needed some type of weapon to defend, because they could just come in your neighborhood and kill you. So you would need something to defend yourself with. don't go to a gunfight with a knife. In fact, don't go to a gunfight with a stick. Protect yourselves. And because of Black people defending themselves and protecting themselves, countless lives and communities were saved from slaughter. She was trying to get people to see that they were in a war. They weren't just regular citizens living their day-to-day lives and occasionally getting attacked. They were in a perpetual war, and they always needed to be ready to defend themselves. I think nowadays, like especially with the police brutality, I think it's more difficult to say that because there's so many views on gun laws and self-defense and everything. And even though we are living in a racist society, most of the racism is so systematic that you honestly can't even see it. Like, some of the racism is so refined that it actually looks like you're being done a favor when you're actually being pushed down and suppressed. For real, for real. It's not like you can see it before your very eyes, a person coming up and burning your entire neighborhood. You only see usually isolated events. Oh, over in this state, oh, there was a police shooting. Over in that state, there is this, blah, 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 blah. Or stuff ruled as suicide, or stuff like, well, he had a bad criminal record, or she was in there, and yada, yada, yada. Like, you don't see just regular, upstanding citizens being sporadically and ruthlessly attacked by mobs anymore. Or at least frequently. So thank you all for watching this video. I hope you learned a lot about Ida B. Wells-Barnett. She was a great woman, and I will always remember her and all of the work that she did to pave the way for both Black men and women, people of color, to protect themselves and to tell the truth, tell it like it is. So have a nice evening, everyone, and talk to you all soon. Bye-bye.